You ever come home from a 10-hour shift only to find a bright orange sticker slapped on your front door saying Notice of Abandonment? Yeah, that was my Tuesday. Name's Jaron McAfee. I'm a hospital electrician, been living in the same house in Maplewood Pines for 8 years. I mow my lawn, pay my dues, wave to the neighbors. I don't start trouble, but trouble found me anyway. It started when I took a much-needed trip to visit my brother in Arizona, first vacation in 3 years. I was gone for 11 days. Left my friend Leo to check in on the house, water the plants, basic stuff. When I got back, the grass was a little long, sure, but the place looked fine, until I saw that sticker. Then came the letter. Certified envelope, HOA letterhead, signed by none other than Patricia Granger, the HOA president and reigning queen of complaints. Middle-aged, bleach blonde bob, voice like an old fax machine, and a permanent expression like she just smelled sour milk. She's lived 2 streets over since the subdivision opened and acts like she owns all of it. The letter said my property has been deemed abandoned, citing overgrown vegetation, no visible activity, and get this, accumulated mail. I stared at it, dumbfounded. Accumulated mail. Leo had picked it up every 3 days. And abandoned? I'd been gone less than 2 weeks. I stormed over to the HOA office trailer they parked near the clubhouse. Patricia was inside, sipping from a mug that read, "I don't do drama, I am drama." I knocked once. She didn't even look up. "If you're here about the abandonment notice, I suggest you take it up with code enforcement." I pointed to the letter. "You filed this, Patricia. You know damn well my house isn't abandoned." She raised an eyebrow. "Mr. McAfee, we received multiple reports. Your grass exceeded 4 inches. There were no lights on at night, and the mailbox was full. My friend was taking care of it. I have photos, security footage. This is nonsense." She set her mug down like it was a gavel. "Your absence was noted. The board approved the filing. If you have an issue, you're welcome to appeal." Appeal? I wasn't going to appeal my own existence, but I kept my cool. Barely back at home, I pulled the security footage from my door cam. Every time-stamped visit Leo made, him watering the lawn, grabbing the mail. I even had a clip of him waving at Patricia as he walked to the porch. The next morning, I headed to the county records office, and that's when things got real. According to the clerk, Patricia had submitted an official affidavit signed and notarized stating the property had been abandoned for over 30 days. She'd even attached fake photos. Old ones from before I'd reseeded the yard last year, with the date metadata stripped. She filed this to start a claim to take over the property, the clerk said. "You're lucky you caught this." I wasn't just angry anymore, I was lit up. I took the footage, Leo's signed affidavit, my boarding passes, bank statements showing vacation purchases, everything, and drove straight to the sheriff's department. Sheriff Dalton leaned back in his chair after watching the videos. "Well," he said, "looks like Patricia Granger's about to have a very different kind of HOA meeting." HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. 3 days passed before I got the call. Sheriff Dalton's voice was calm, but I could tell he was winding up for something big. "Jaron, you might want to come down to the station. We've got a few things to go over. Bring any additional documentation you haven't already handed in." When I got there, he was standing near the evidence board, flipping through a folder thick with printed screenshots and notarized statements. He motioned me into the small conference room off the main hallway and shut the door behind us. "We've confirmed the affidavit Patricia submitted was doctored. The photos she attached were printed from a cloud folder registered to the HOA's shared drive. Metadata shows they were taken over a year ago. She stripped the dates, cropped out timestamps, and presented them as current." I sat down, jaw tight. "So how deep does this go?" Dalton pulled a chair out and sat across from me. "We found something else. She didn't act alone. The notary who signed the affidavit, he's her cousin. Lives out in Crestwood, not even a licensed notary in this county. We've already contacted the state licensing board. That stamp, it's not registered here, might be forged." I leaned forward. You're telling me she used a fake notary to try and steal my house? Dalton nodded, tapping the folder. That's not all. In the span of the last 6 months, Patricia filed similar affidavits on 3 other properties. 2 were vacation homes. 1 belonged to an active duty service member deployed overseas. She claimed abandonment, submitted pictures, and in one case tried to list the property on a foreclosure tracking site. A slow burn settled in my chest. So she's been running a scam. Looks like it. She files the documents, claims the house is abandoned, and then tries to push it into receivership. If no one catches it in time, she can lobby the HOA to take control through a quitclaim shuffle. She's been using obscure municipal codes and hoping nobody looks too close. What happens now? Dalton stood and opened the door. Now we bring her in. I followed him out to the front lot where a deputy was already waiting near a cruiser. An hour later, Patricia was in handcuffs, escorted from her office as a small crowd gathered near the clubhouse. Someone filmed it on their phone. The video ended up on a local community page within minutes. While the arrest was satisfying, I knew it wasn't the end. The HOA board was still intact, and they'd voted on the initial action, which meant I had more work to do. That night, I dug into public records. The HOA's bylaws were posted on a clunky website that hadn't been updated since the Obama administration. But buried in the governing documents was a clause labeled Emergency Property Management Protocol. It allowed the HOA to step in on vacant properties, but only under specific conditions: a 30-day absence, visible deterioration, and no designated caretaker. All 3 had to be verifiable, and the HOA president had to submit documentation to the board, not act independently. I printed everything, highlighted the violations, and started drafting a formal complaint. The next morning, I requested a hearing with the County Housing Commission. At the same time, Leo agreed to speak on record. We met with a housing inspector and showed her the footage. Leo on the property, watering plants, interacting with neighbors. The inspector took notes and left visibly irritated. 2 days later, a certified envelope arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA, it came from the county clerk. Inside was a notice confirming my hearing date and a list of attendees. The Housing Commission, 2 members of the county legal department, and 3 of the remaining HOA board members. When the day arrived, I dressed like I was going to court. Not flashy, just clean and prepared. The hearing was held in a government annex building downtown, in a long room lined with folding chairs and an elevated bench at the front. As soon as the session opened, one of the commissioners addressed the board members. We've reviewed the affidavit submitted regarding Mr. McAfee's property. It does not meet the criteria for emergency management. Furthermore, the images and the notary stamp used are under investigation for fraud. Do you have anything to say before we proceed? Walter Langley, the HOA treasurer, stood up. Short, balding, and always wearing a navy sweater vest, he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. We were unaware of the forgery. We trusted Patricia to follow procedures. The board wasn't shown the affidavit before it was submitted. The commissioner raised an eyebrow. Then why did you vote to approve the abandonment claim? Walter hesitated. We were told it had already been verified. Patricia presented it as a formality. I spoke up. You didn't ask for proof. You just took her word and stamped it. Another board member, Carla Jennings, a retired librarian with a passive-aggressive streak, adjusted her glasses. We had no reason to believe she'd falsify documents. She's been president for over a decade. The commissioner leaned forward. That's precisely the problem. There were no checks on her authority. That ends now. By the end of the hearing, the Housing Commission had issued a formal cease directive. The HOA was barred from initiating any property claims without direct county oversight. They also instructed the board to hold a public election to reconstitute leadership within 60 days. Outside the building, a reporter from the local news station flagged me down. Word had spread fast. I kept it brief but made sure people knew what happened. She tried to take my house using lies and fake paperwork. I've got a full-time job and someone watching the place. If this could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. That night, several neighbors came by to check in. Some were angry one couple had almost lost their rental property the same way. Another man, a retired Marine named Curtis, offered to help organize a recall campaign. Within a week, we had signatures from over 2/3 of the residents, enough to force a new election. Meanwhile, Patricia's story hit the evening news, and not just locally. It reached a few national outlets that specialized in HOA overreach stories. She'd been charged with filing fraudulent documents, forging a notarization, and attempted property theft. The sheriff's department confirmed she'd be arraigned in county court. At the next community meeting held in the open-air park instead of the clubhouse, by unanimous vote I stood at the front with the recall petition in hand. "We're not just voting out a president," I said. "We're taking back our neighborhood." Cheers broke out across the grass. Curtis stepped forward and raised a fresh banner someone had made, "Maplewood Pines, not Patricia's Kingdom." We held the new election 2 weeks later. All 5 board seats were replaced. I declined to run, but sat on the oversight committee that was formed to prevent exactly this kind of abuse in the future. The best part: the county issued a ruling allowing affected homeowners to sue the HOA for damages. I filed mine the same day. I wasn't just defending my house anymore. I was making sure no one else in Maplewood Pines would ever have to. The night after the recall vote, a quiet calm settled over Maplewood Pines for the first time in months. It didn't last. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door just after sunrise. It was Curtis, the retired Marine. He stood there, holding a thick manila envelope and wearing a look that said something had gone sideways. "I didn't want to leave this in your mailbox," he said. "You're going to want to see it before word spreads." Inside the envelope were photocopies of internal HOA emails. Dozens of them, printed from someone's personal inbox. The sender field was a familiar name, Rachel Lunt, the former HOA secretary who had quietly resigned a month before the scandal broke. She hadn't been seen at any meetings since. Curtis handed me a USB drive. "The originals are on this." Rachel dropped it off at my place late last night, said she was tired of watching it rot from the inside. I sifted through the emails. Most were boring administrative fluff, but then I found what she really wanted us to see. One email, dated 4 months before my vacation, had the subject line, "Abandonment procedures were ready." It was addressed to Patricia, Walter, and Carla. In it, Rachel outlined a so-called pilot program to increase HOA revenue by targeting undervalued properties. They'd compiled a list of homeowners who traveled frequently or had limited local family. The plan was to manufacture abandonment claims, then fast-track the properties into HOA receivership. "We start with McAfee's place," Rachel had written. "He's got no spouse listed, works long hours, and no kids. Easy optics. If it works, we replicate." Another email from Patricia read, "Keep this off the board minutes, no paper trail, just results." My stomach turned. I knew they were shady, but this was systemic, deliberate. A coordinated scheme to defraud homeowners out of their property. I called Sheriff Dalton immediately. By that afternoon, I was sitting across from him and a county investigator in a secured conference room. The USB was plugged into a laptop, emails scrolling across the screen. Dalton leaned back, eyes narrowed. "This isn't just HOA misconduct anymore. This is conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." The county investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Nadira Singh, nodded slowly. "And based on the language, it looks like they were trying to flip these properties to investors under the table. We need to trace any transfers they initiated." It took less than 48 hours before things escalated. Walter Langley was arrested outside a golf course on a Friday morning. Carla Jennings was picked up at her daughter's house later that day. Both were charged with conspiracy, attempted fraud, and falsifying public records. The county announced a sweeping investigation into all HOA property filings over the past 2 years. A task force was formed, and Nadira Singh was placed in charge. She asked me to testify in front of the grand jury as a key witness. I agreed, but the fallout didn't stop there. An emergency meeting was called at the community center, this time run by the interim board elected after the recall. The place was packed. Residents, some who had never shown up to a single meeting before, filled every chair and stood along the walls up front. Curtis addressed the crowd. For years, this HOA operated like a private club. No transparency, no accountability. That ends tonight. He handed the mic to me. Many of you know what happened to me, I said, scanning the room, but what we uncovered goes beyond one house. They built a system to take homes from people they thought couldn't fight back. They picked veterans, seniors, single parents. And they covered it up with fake paperwork and closed-door votes. A woman near the back raised her hand. What happens to the properties they already tried to take? Nadira, who had been quietly observing near the side wall, stepped forward. The county's freezing all recent HOA-related transfers. If any sale or claim was based on fraudulent filings, we'll reverse them. Every homeowner will have a chance to reclaim their property. And if you know someone who moved away after receiving a suspicious notice, tell them to contact us. A man stood up, early 50s, tan windbreaker, steelworker hands. I left for 6 weeks to care for my mom last year. I came back to find a lien notice on my door. They said it was for emergency upkeep, charged me $9,000. Nadira nodded. Bring the documentation, we'll add it to the case. After the meeting, people stayed behind to talk. Stories came out quiet at first, then louder. A retired teacher who'd been fined for unseen violations. A widower who lost his shed after the HOA claimed it violated historical uniformity. Each one added weight to the growing evidence. Meanwhile, I was prepping for the grand jury. Nadira's team worked with me to compile a timeline: emails, video, receipts, correspondence. Leo submitted a sworn deposition. The county subpoenaed the HOA's financial records. What they found was dirtier than anyone expected. Tens of thousands had been quietly funneled into a legal contingency fund. But no lawyers had ever been paid from it. Instead, the money had been used for private surveillance contracts, out-of-state travel, and in one case, a wire transfer to a shell company registered in Nevada. Patricia had been running a private slush fund under the HOA's name. When the grand jury convened, I sat under oath and walked them through every detail: how I came home to a fake abandonment notice, uncovered the forged affidavit, and exposed the broader scheme. The jurors listened closely, some taking notes, others frowning as the evidence mounted. 3 weeks later, the grand jury returned indictments. Patricia, Walter, and Carla were each charged with multiple felonies, including conspiracy to commit wire fraud, misuse of public funds, and attempted unlawful property acquisition. Patricia faced additional charges for forging a notary stamp and falsifying sworn affidavits. The news made the state headlines this time. Maplewood Pines became ground zero for a statewide audit of HOA practices. Several other communities began asking questions, digging through their own records. The state attorney general announced a new oversight initiative for homeowner associations, citing our case as the catalyst. Back at home, things slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. The interim board made sweeping changes. All HOA meetings were now live-streamed. Financial records were published monthly. A whistleblower line was established, and the clause that had allowed emergency property management without court oversight, gone, struck from the bylaws by unanimous vote. I didn't go back to living quietly, not anymore. Curtis and I helped form a neighborhood committee focused on resident rights. We held workshops on how to read HOA bylaws, how to challenge violations, and how to document every interaction. People showed up. They asked questions. They stopped being afraid. One evening, as I was rolling my trash bins to the curb, a younger guy from 3 streets over jogged up. He just bought his first home a few months back. "Hey," he said, catching his breath. "I just wanted to say thanks. What you did standing up to them, it gave the rest of us a shot." I shook his hand. "You don't need to thank me, just make sure no one else has to go through it." The sun dipped below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the lawns. For the first time in a long while, it felt like those shadows weren't hiding anything anymore. The trial began on an overcast Monday in early spring, a chilly wind sweeping across the courthouse steps as reporters crowded the front entrance. I watched from the rear parking lot, leaning against Leo's truck, waiting for my name to be called inside. He hadn't said much since we arrived, just stood beside me, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the line of sharply dressed attorneys filing in with briefcases and tight faces. "You ready for this?" he asked finally. I nodded. "More than they are." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. The public gallery was packed. Neighbors, local officials, even a few people from other counties who'd followed the case online. On the prosecution's side sat Nadira Singh, flanked by two assistant district attorneys flipping through thick binders. In the defendant's row, Patricia looked smaller than I remembered. Her once pristine posture sagged slightly, and her usual rigid expression had melted into something grayer, hollow, and tight around the eyes. Walter and Carla sat behind her, each with their own legal counsel, trying to appear unaffected. The judge, a stern but fair man named Judge Vance, called the court to order and laid out the charges: criminal conspiracy, fraudulent notarization, unlawful property claims, embezzlement, and misuse of public funds. When they called me to the stand, I made eye contact with no one. Just walked the aisle, raised my hand, took the oath, and sat down before the jury. The lead prosecutor, a woman named Jules Grant, stepped forward. "Mr. McAfee, can you walk us through the moment you knew something wasn't right?" I kept my voice steady. "It was the day I got back from vacation. I found a notice taped to my door saying my house had been declared abandoned." "And how long were you away?" 11 days. She moved closer. "Who was maintaining the property in your absence?" "My friend Leo. He watered the plants, picked up the mail, checked the yard. I have time-stamped footage showing him on the property multiple times." Jules nodded and clicked a remote. The courtroom dimmed and a monitor lit up with one of the videos. Leo walking up the path, waving at someone off camera. "And who is he waving at there?" she asked. "Patricia Granger," I said. "That's her passing by on the sidewalk." The jury watched in silence as the footage played through. Jules turned the lights back on and held up a printed copy of the affidavit Patricia submitted to the county. "Is this the document she filed to claim your property had been abandoned?" "Yes." "And do these photos reflect the condition of your property during your trip?" "No, those were taken months earlier before I re-landscaped." She stripped the metadata and submitted them as recent. She handed out copies of the affidavit, pointing to the notary seal. "Do you recognize this stamp?" "I do now. It belongs to her cousin. He doesn't even live in this county and isn't authorized to notarize filings here." Jules stepped back. No further questions. Patricia's lawyer, a thick-necked man named Lowell Brenner, approached next. He tried to rattle me. "Isn't it true your lawn exceeded the allowed height under HOA code?" My jaw tightened. "Even if it did, that only triggers a maintenance notice." "Not abandonment. Did you inform the HOA you'd be gone?" "No, because I didn't have to. There's no bylaw requiring residents to disclose travel plans." He flipped through notes, searching for something that never came. "So you didn't communicate?" "I had a caretaker." "That's what matters," he paced. "But the board approved the abandonment filing. Would you call that a conspiracy?" "I'd call it blind compliance with a fraudulent document." The judge raised a hand. "Let's keep this on track." After I stepped down, Leo testified next. He detailed his visits, showed the receipts for the supplies he bought while I was gone, and identified Patricia in the surveillance video. Then came Nadira's moment. She took the stand as a surprise witness, her badge clipped to her blazer. The courtroom quieted as she described the digital paper trail. Emails, financial records, off-the-books transactions. She walked the jury through everything: how funds were rerouted through a shell company registered in Nevada, how properties were being prepped for quick transfer, and how a pattern of deceit spanned over a year. The goal, she said, was to quietly assume control of undervalued homes through technical violations and manipulated documentation. Once under HOA control, the homes would be sold to pre-selected investors, many of whom had personal ties to the board. Even the judge leaned forward. The defense scrambled. Carla's attorney tried to distance her from the emails, suggesting she was merely a passive participant. Walter's lawyer claimed he was misled by Patricia. Patricia's team attempted to discredit the surveillance footage, but it didn't hold. The county IT expert verified the timestamps and digital integrity. In closing arguments, Jules stood before the jury and held up the HOA's own handbook. This manual was weaponized. What was meant to ensure neighborhood order became a tool for personal gain. These defendants didn't just break the rules, they rewrote them in secret. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. All 3 were found guilty on all counts. Patricia was sentenced to 12 years in state prison, with no parole for the first 7. Walter received 8 years, Carla 6. Fines were levied, restitution ordered, and the court appointed an independent auditor to oversee the HOA's finances for the next decade. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. I didn't speak to reporters. I didn't need to. The story had spoken for itself. Back in Maplewood Pines, the changes deepened. A new HOA charter was ratified, one that required public access to all meetings, mandatory third-party audits, and term limits on board members. No more closed-door votes, no legal actions without a public hearing. A new dispute resolution panel was formed, made up of residents without any prior ties to the board. Rachel Lunt, the former secretary who'd handed off the emails, returned quietly to the neighborhood. She didn't ask for praise, but at the first community meeting after the sentencing, Curtis handed her a plaque anyway, for refusing to stay silent. The mood had changed. Neighbors who once avoided each other now stopped to talk. People who had once feared retribution now posted questions openly on the neighborhood forum. The HOA was no longer a shadow government, it was a tool, and the people finally held the handle. Late one Saturday, I found myself sitting on my front porch, watching Leo and a few others put up a new community bulletin board near the park trailhead. It wasn't anything fancy, just cork and weatherproof glass, but it felt like a monument. Leo caught my eye and held up a paper he was about to post. "You believe this? Potluck next weekend. Everyone's invited," I laughed. "Who's organizing it?" He grinned. "You are, you just didn't know it yet." I shook my head, but I didn't argue. After everything, it felt right. That night, as the sun dipped behind the pines and the porch light flickered on, I looked down the street, clean, quiet, but no longer watchful in the way it used to be. The fear was gone. What remained was a neighborhood that had woken up, fought back, and won.